July 27th is the anniversary of someone slapping the ugly nickname Huns on the Germans, something that did them enormous propaganda damage in World War I. And you want to know who did this? Oh, I'll tell you, it was Kaiser Wilhelm II. That's right. You know Godwin's law, which in various forms says that the longer a discussion goes on the internet, the more certain it is that somebody will make an inappropriate comparison to Adolf Hitler, and whoever does that first loses. But I find myself surprisingly often going back not to Hitler, but to the Kaiser, and to the question of the origins of World War I, whose disastrous impact on the modern world included giving rise to both Bolshevism and Nazism, as well as creating the geopolitical conditions that led us to World War II. So if the Germans really were guilty in causing World War I, and if the Kaiser was the prime mover, then he bears an enormous burden of historical guilt. And you know what? It fits him, I think, like a tailor-made suit. The circumstance here was a speech that he gave in Bremerhaven to German troops who were leaving to suppress the Boxer Rebellion. And it was a typical piece of bombastic, militaristic, threatening, over-the-top belligerence by the Kaiser, including, he said, you're going because the Chinese have violated the law of nations, right? Because they had the unbelievable effrontery to rise up against a bunch of nations who'd conquered them and carved up their country and imposed all sorts of insulting restrictions, from rules about trade to those parks with a sign saying no dogs are Chinese. And can you imagine these wretches objecting to that? But there's more. In his speech, the Kaiser said, no quarter will be given. Take no prisoners. Act in such a way that no Chinese will dare to look cross-eyed at a German for 1,000 years. That's pretty bad, right? Well, the Foreign Office put out an edited version of the speech, which included that passage. What it took out was the Kaiser specifically bringing up the Huns, saying that the Huns under Attila 1,000 years ago made such a name for themselves that it lives on as a symbol of power. Imitate that. He specifically said act like the Huns. Now, it was a very bad historical analogy. For one thing, and maybe I'm nitpicking here, the Huns had not lived 1,000 years before the Kaiser's speech, which was in 1900. In fact, Attila died in 453 AD, so it was 1,500 years ago. But there are two other points that the Kaiser might usefully have dwelt upon before adopting this role model. It's like people who talk about how great Napoleon was, and I want to say, you do know he lost, right? Attila tried but failed to take Rome, and shortly after his death, his Hunnic Empire fell apart. And indeed, Kaiser Wilhelm, in the end, turned Germany from a major world power into a despised, second-rate nation by his attempt, more or less, to conquer the world. Yes, he did make one, by setting the stage for Adolf Hitler's second attempt to do so, and by casting the Germans in such an astoundingly uncivilized light, as though it were a matter of pride. Sometimes I know prisoners are not taken in war, but to tell the troops as they're getting on the troop ships, not in hot blood, but well before they will see action, give no quarter, take no prisoners, behave in such a bestial way that for 1,000 years people will tremble at your name as they tremble at the name of Attila and the Huns. That gives people the idea that you are in fact belligerent, contemptuous of human rights, and in a very real way dedicated to behaving in a subhuman fashion. So yes, you're looking for the causes of World War I. You're looking for this idea that the Germans were Huns and a menace to world civilization. The place that you find it is in the mouth of their Kaiser, who on July 27th, back in the year 1900, specifically urged his soldiers to act like Huns. If the Germans wondered later why people thought they were doing so, they should know exactly who to blame. If you're enjoying these commentaries, please visit my website, that's johnrobson.ca, make a contribution to sustain my work, and of course keep watching and subscribing to The Rebel for the news and commentary you won't get anywhere else.